Hey guys, Matthew. In today's video, I've got something really special for you guys. So a lot of people have been asking me on stream, how do I craft this? How do I craft that? So I decided to make an actual guide on how to craft every single one of the pieces of gear for my Tornado Shot Omniscience stacking build. So I do want to first off start by the video by saying that if you're playing, say, the 1x, 5x, or even the 20x version of the build, you are probably not going to want to craft your own items. For the most part, you are going to want to actually go ahead and just buy the items pre-crafted. And I've got a bit of a tip to show you guys on how to find out if an item is, good for your build or not. So what we're going to do first off is we're going to head over to the POB of whichever is your budget version, right? So let's just say this is the mid-budget, which is around the 20x mark on the POB, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the weapon. I'm just going to use weapon as an example, but you can do the same thing with every other piece of gear. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to wipe it clean to only have prefixes. So what I'll do, now this will require a little bit of game knowledge, but for the most part, what you need to know is that prefixes are going to be flat damage. So flat elemental, fire, cold, and lightning are what are the prefixes on bows and what we care about. Things like attack speed, crit chance, multi, arrows, right? All those are suffixes. So in our case, we're just going to go ahead and remove the attack speed, the dexterity, and the double damage. And when we do that, we are going to be, basically, we're going to see what the bow looks like if it had just these modifiers, right? So now the idea is that I'll be able to easily compare one-to-one with other bows that are available on the market. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and head over to the trade site, and I'll make a filter for something very basic, like around what you'll see in the POB. So what I have here is an 800 elemental DPS, 1.4 attacks per second, with a little bit of cold damage because we do want to prioritize cold, so around 200 flat cold damage. And then I can kind of look at what these sort of items are. Now it's going to be very important that I make sure that there is no crafted prefix when I'm going through these bows. And an open suffix would also be very good. So I'm kind of just looking, and I saw one which, kind of caught my eye, which was, let's see, where was it? Which did not have this one here, right? This one, Dread Barrage, is at 1 exalt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this, right, by pressing this little button here. I'm going to go over to my POB, and I'm just going to Control V it. Once I Control V, what I'll be able to do is I'll be able to remove all of the modifiers, again, that are suffixes. So I'm going to remove the crit. Right, and now I'll be left with, again, only the prefixes, and I can see that this bow is around 7% less damage than the bow that I actually had, but this is also because this bow has the attack speed enchant, so I'm going to have to make it fair. So what I'll do is I'll go to Apply Enchant right here, and I'll go to Harvest, and then I'll look for the attack speed. And then you'll see that this bow is around 5% less damage than the bow that I have on the POB, but, of course, this is a lesser base. This is a spine bow, which is much slower. But it still has over 900 elemental DPS, which would be plenty fine for the 20x version, and this is only a single exalt, so this is a very good deal. And essentially, this is how I would figure out whether an item is good or not for my POB, and you can do the exact same for different, budget, right? So if you would go on the super budget, right, the 5 exalt version of the build, we can do the exact same thing. I take the thicket bow, I remove all the things that are not simply the flat damages, I save that, and then when I go ahead and import this bow, you'll see that if I go ahead and remove this crit chance on this bow as well, and of course, this one did not have the enchant either, so it's fair, it's a 1-to-1 comparison, you'll see that this bow on average would be something like 1% more DPS, right? So again, it's a pretty solid option. So this is kind of what I wanted to showcase, but now let's get into the actual thick of the video, which is going to be how to craft every single one of the pieces of gear. There's actually going to be quite a few, so you can use the timestamps if you're interested in a specific craft, because I'm not only just going to, go ahead and run through the craft, I'm going to also go ahead and do the craft. Of course, we are going to cheat in order to save some time, but I'll also go ahead and showcase in the emulator what that would look like. So let's just start off with the bow. The bow is a very simple craft. Actually, every single one of these crafts are very simple crafts, and they're pretty much all essence crafted items, which makes it very, very easy to do. So it all begins by, first off, getting the base that you'll want to be using. In the Craft of Exile, I'll be using a Thicket Bow, which is the best base due to its 1.5 attacks per second. But you could also use, what I think is a really good option, is using Imperial Bow, because there's a divination card. So a 6-link Imperial Bow is literally a handful of chaos, as you can see, and this is pre-linked already. So that's a very, very good option as well. Much cheaper than a Thicket Bow, which is multiple exalts just for the base. And then, of course, if you want to go super endgame, you'll go with either +2 fractured base or +1 arrow synthesized base, so I made a search for that. But yeah, it all starts by spamming Deafening Essences of Hatred, because we want to get, again, prioritize cold for brittle. So we're going to spam the essences until we get some decent amount of flat. So what I'll do here is I'll go ahead and go back to my previous POB, right? Again, say I'm going to go to the mid-budget, and then I'm going to go to my bow. And again, I'm going to have to remove the suffixes on the bow in order to make this very easy to see the one-to-one comparison. So I'll remove the suffixes, I'll save that, and then I'm going to head over to Craft of Exile. And what I'll do is I'll go ahead and just use Essence of Hatred, Deafening ones. And I'm just going to spam until I see either a T1 of either of the other elements, or like some decent mix and match of, say, for example, T3, T5, or T2, T6, something like that. So even this is actually not horrible. We have T5 and T4, so I could actually test this. So what I'll do is I'll press this button here, and it says item copied to clipboard. I'll head over the POB, and again, I'm just going to throw it in there. I'm going to go ahead and remove the suffixes yet again. And to make it fair, I do have to go through and also put the enchantment. So as you can see, we're going to go heist and attack speed. And you can see that this is about a 10% less damage, but it only took me a few essences to roll this. And of course, this can probably be divined better, which is something that you would also want to make sure. But now that we actually got our prefixes done, let's just say that we decided to actually keep this. This is definitely not bad. It's not even that much worse than what I personally have on my own bow in the game. What we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and finish off the suffixes, right? Once we've decided that, yes, this is a good enough bow, so we look at the damage here, right? 750 elemental DPS without attack speed. So if I go ahead and simply craft on attack speed, it's going to be quite decent. So what I'll do here is we're going to finish out the bow, which the first thing we're going to have to do is lock in our prefixes with prefixes cannot be changed. So this is a bench craft, and it's going to be a suffix. So prefixes cannot be changed, and then it's going to be very simple. We're just going to use a Veiled Chaos Orb. Now, a Veiled Chaos Orb, what that will do is it will reroll our suffixes to some whatever random stuff, but the important part is it's going to give us a veiled modifier, right? So as you can see, now I have a veiled suffix, but it's going to be very important that we follow through the guide and that we make sure that we block before we unveil in order to increase our odds of getting something that we want. So what I'll do here is I'm going to go ahead and block any of the damage per charge. So Endurance, Frenzy, or Power Charge, these are all suffixes, and they're all basically worth the same, if you will. So I'm just going to go ahead and look for damage per charge. So here we go, increased damage per power charge. I'm going to craft this, and then when I unveil, I'm going to make sure that I don't get that. So what we got here is strength and intelligence with crit chance, chaos damage multi, and cast speed. So this would be a brick. In this case, what I would have to do is craft on the suffix prefixes cannot be changed and try again. Now this is pretty unlikely. You're pretty much, the vast majority of the time anyways, you're going to get either the attack speed mod or the double damage, and essentially that's kind of what we're going for. So again, we're going to block and then unveil. And this time, see, we got the attack speed and trigger. So we're gonna go ahead and choose that, and then we're gonna finish the craft off with a bench mod of double damage, and that's pretty much going to be our bow. So let's go ahead and do just that. Let's see, double damage, right? So this would be our bow here. So if I copy that, copy to clipboard, and I go back to my POB, going back into the mid-budget POB, you'll see that this bow is roughly, let's see, so this right now looks like it's 16% less damage, or 15%-ish less damage, but we are going to apply the enchantment for harvest, and then it's going to become a little bit better. As you can see, 12% less damage than this bow, but this bow is properly divined. But essentially, this is exactly how I went about crafting my bow, spamming Deafening Essences of Hatred until you get some other decent prefixes of flat, fire, and lightning. You know, even just a single T1 roll of either fire or lightning would be very, very good. It doesn't even need to be both. If you get a mix of both, though, that's perfectly fine as well. And then again, prefix lock, Veiled Chaos, craft on the block, and then unveil for either the attack speed or the double damage, and craft on the last stat, and finish it off with the harvest enchant. Super simple craft, and you know, a very good way to get an endgame bow for pretty cheap. So yeah, that's kind of what I would do there. Now moving on to the quivers. The quivers are actually going to be a pretty interesting one. Now, in my opinion, quiver is not something that you should craft. I think it's something that you should buy pre-crafted. And the reason for that is because there are so many good modifiers on quivers for this build that it doesn't really make sense to craft it yourself. However, if you want a really good quiver, especially if you want like a synthesized +1 arrow quiver like the one that I have in the game here, as you can see, this thing, right, which is giving me 2 additional arrows, then you will kind of have to craft it yourself. So looking back at what we are going to do in order to craft this, it's actually going to be pretty simple. So what you're going to do is you're going to choose the quiver base that you care about. Now, of course, if you're going with a synthesized quiver, this is not going to matter, as your +1 arrow is going to kill your implicit anyways. But yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to choose which essence we want to use. So we have essences of doubt for accuracy, essences of zeal for attack speed, dread for prod speed, and scorn for crit multi. Now, looking at this, the ultimate best essence, in my opinion, would actually be doubt. And now this is something that might be a little bit weird to you guys because nobody ever uses essences of doubt. But the reason why essence of doubt is really good is because it gives us accuracy. And we need to get a 1 roll of accuracy on this build, either on the gloves or the quiver. And it needs to be a really good roll of like 400, 500, 600 or so, right? So this is actually good because the quiver can allow you to get it via an essence, but you can't do that on the gloves. So by guaranteeing it on your quiver, when you go to craft the gloves, you don't have to worry about it. So this is what I would personally use. Now, it all starts with a little bit of RNG. You're basically going to have to spam the essence of your choice until you get bow attacks, fire, and additional arrow. So looking at my essence, here, I'm going to use doubt, and then I would just spam away, spam, until eventually I get +1 arrow. So again, we are going to cheat a little bit here, and I'll just go ahead and add it manually, so we don't sit here for a million years. But this is kind of what that would look like. Now, at this point, you've kind of got 2 choices. What I would do personally, and what I put in the guide, is that we are kind of going to lock in our last suffix, because our last suffix is going to be crafted attack speed, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to bench craft, can have up to 3 crafted modifiers. Now, the reason why we bench craft this is because we want it to block the last suffix. So whatever we're going to do after this, we are never going to be able to add a random suffix to our quiver. Okay, so now that we have this, next thing we're going to do is we're going to craft on suffixes cannot be changed, which is a prefix. Now, the idea here is that we want to lock in our accuracy and our +1 arrow, because this is already going to be hard enough to get. And of course, lock in, also lock in our multiple crafted mod. Now, once we have suffixes cannot be changed, there's going to be 2 different options. Whether you are going for, you know, endgame quiver, or if you're going for, you know, fairly cheap quiver. If you're going for a cheap quiver, all you're going to have to do is slam again a Veiled Chaos Orb. So what that's going to allow you to do if you slam a Veiled Chaos is it's going to give you a random prefix. So now in this case, we are actually going to benchcraft mana, because mana is one of the unveils which we don't want. So that's going to be a benchcraft prefix, benchcraft that. And now what we're going to do is we're going to unveil for the prefix, which is going to be either, we're going to be looking for life or flat damage, right? It's kind of going to be up to you what you're going to decide to go for. In our case, we're probably going to go with life, and then we are going to finish off the quiver by removing this crafted modifier here, which is also going to remove the mana, right? And then we are going to craft on attack speed. And essentially, this would be our quiver, right? So as you can see, there's not many modifiers on our quiver, and it's not too great, which is why I don't personally think it's a good idea to actually craft a quiver by yourself, unless you're actually going for a very endgame quiver. So looking at endgame quiver, it's going to be slightly different. The beginning is actually going to be the exact same. The difference here is that, let's just go ahead and remove this life mod. The difference is once we have our accuracy alongside our additional arrow and our crafted mods, what we're going to have to do is benchcraft the prefix suffixes cannot be changed, and then we're going to have to harvest Reforge plus life, right? So Reforge life is going to give us a life prefix. Oh my god. Well, that would be quite the jackpot. But every time that we are going to go ahead and Reforge life, and this is going to cost us 2 exalt every single attempt, it's going to give us a life roll, right? I can't believe how good this quiver is. That I wish that was me. But anyways, so let's go ahead and go do that again. So reforged life, and most of the time it's just going to give us a bad life roll. Every time it gives us a bad life roll, we're going to have to craft on suffixes cannot be changed again and reforged life again until we get a half decent life roll. Now, if you ever get to this point where we have 3 suffixes and 3 prefixes, we're actually going to need to do reforge keeping suffixes because we don't want to annul, right? We don't want to do that because that could get rid of our suffixes. So reforge keeping suffixes. Now this is going to give us a random prefix. And again, we're going to do suffixes cannot be changed, and we are going to reforge life. Now, eventually, we're going to end up with a decent life roll and nothing else, or potentially something else. Even better if you have another stat which you care about. So, for example, you know, a flat damage to attacks or literally anything would be better than nothing because we're actually not going to be able to add anything else at the end of the craft. So now that our quiver looks like this, right, we've got life, accuracy, in our +1 arrow with our crafted mod, we are actually going to go ahead and once again craft on suffixes cannot be changed, which is why I'm saying this is very expensive, and in my opinion, it's not worth crafting these quivers unless you're going for a synthesized +1 arrow quiver, right, and you're going with basically a super endgame. Otherwise, just buy a 5, 10, 20x quiver, and you're going to save way more currency because this gets really expensive really fast, and it's not even perfect. All right. So once we have this done, suffixes cannot be changed with our life roll, we're actually going to have to unveil at this point. So this is going to be a 50-50 because our suffixes cannot be changed. So in reality, the only thing that can happen is it can remove either the suffixes cannot be changed, which is what we want, or the life. If it removes the life, like it did in this case, we would actually just go ahead and reforge life again, which is why this can get very, very expensive. But another option is that let's just go ahead and unveil it again, and hopefully next time, yeah, okay. So in this case, we actually hit these suffixes cannot be changed. So now we have a veiled prefix. So we are going to go ahead and benchcraft mana. This is going to serve as a block so that when we unveil, we are guaranteed the hybrid flat damage. Now, here's a cool thing about this hybrid flat damage. By taking up this hybrid flat damage, you are actually going to have about 0.6% less damage than a tier 1 damage with bows, which basically means that this is slightly worse than a modifier which would be nearly impossible to get. So at this point, we would have our attack, our life, our flat damage, accuracy, +1 arrow, and now we would go ahead and remove our crafted mods, and we would finish off our bench, or craft with attack speed. Now this does leave us an open prefix, which means that we could also augment later on if we really wanted to. We could go ahead and do like an augment cold, or an augment fire, or an augment lightning. So let's go ahead and just see what that could give us. So for example, we could augment cold. The only possible roll is cold damage to attacks, right? And that's because there's really nothing else. It's the same thing with fire, right? It's going to give us fire damage to attacks as well. So this is guaranteed, but of course it's not guaranteed that you're going to get a good roll. So that's kind of how you would end the final 6th affix if you really wanted to go for broke on the quiver. Okay, moving on, we are going to go ahead and talk about gloves. So gloves, I was actually going to tell you guys to just buy some, but the reality is I looked at the market and it's empty. It seems like people have just absolutely emptied out the good spell suppression life gloves, so I had to come up with my own method of crafting them, and I think I found something that is both very, very consistent and also not that expensive, which could be applied to the 20 or especially the 50x version, as you're probably going to be spending a few x, but you're going to end up with some very, very good gloves. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to choose our base. So I would recommend going with sling gloves of item level 85, and the reason why sling gloves is because they have the highest base evasion on all gloves, and also pure dexterity base is going to be significantly easier to hit spell suppression than a hybrid base. When you're spamming essences on a pure dex base, it's going to take you about 35 essences to hit T1 spell suppression. Meanwhile, on a hybrid pair of gloves with, say, evasion and energy shield, it would take you upwards of 80 to 90. So it's a lot of currency saved by going with pure dexterity. Okay, so once we have our base, it's kind of going to be the same situation. We are just going to spam essences. So for budget gloves, I would recommend going with Essences of Sorrow, because for budget, you're probably not going to have a ton of omniscience. So omniscience is super, super important because it's not only giving you damage, but it's also capping your resistances because we're not really getting resistance anywhere on our gear. So while you could go for zeal for more damage, in my opinion, sorrow is the better way to go. So we're going to spam essences of sorrow until we get T1 suppression. And again, this is around an average of 25. Now, as you can see, it only took me one, or 35, sorry. It only took me one, so I got pretty lucky. But this is essentially what we would end up with, right? We would end up with T1 spell suppression and our dexterity, and the last suffix, we really don't care about it on the budget option for the gloves. We're just going to come with, we're just going to deal with kind of whatever happens, because anyways, we have to annul it, right? So in this case, we would have to actually annul this fire resistance in order to keep going forward with the craft. So I'm just going to go ahead and annul. Unfortunately, I hit my dexterity. I hit it again. All right, there we go. So now I've got 2 suffixes and 1 open suffix and 1 random prefix. This is perfect for me because at this point I can go forward by utilizing the Eldritch influence in order to make the craft much easier. So now in my case, I got pretty lucky because I annulled all my prefixes, but let's just say that I had another prefix on my gloves here. Or let's just say that I had even another prefix, right? So I have full prefixes and 2 of the good suffixes and an empty suffix. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Eldritch Crafting, and I'm going to use a Lesser Ember. Now, a Lesser Ember is going to instantly make my gloves Searing Exarch dominant, which means I can easily get rid of all these prefixes without having to spend 2 Exalt by locking them and scouring them, or by having to take some RNG with annulling. I will be able to simply basically use the Eldritch Annuls, which are right here. Because this is Searing Exarch dominant, I'm guaranteed to hit all my prefixes, and then I end up with a pair of gloves that will look something like this: Dexterity, Chance to Suppress, and then nothing else on them. So I'm going to go ahead and simply Benchcraft, can have up to 3 crafted mods, and then we're going to finish off with some good old life, right, which is going to be solid. So solid life, and then we're going to finish off with a very good mod for damage, which is damage while leeching. So let's see if I can find that. Damage while leeching. And there we have it. This would kind of be a fairly solid, you know, mid-game gloves. This is going to cost us something like maybe, you know, 5 or 6x to craft. But it's going to have exactly all of the stuff that we want to have on the gloves, and there's not going to be too much RNG involved. Okay, now what if you want some actual good endgame gloves? We can actually go further than this. So in this case, what we're going to want is actually to use Deafening Essence of Zeal for attack speed. And essentially, we're just going to spam these Deafening Essences of Zeal until we get the T1 suppression and also another good mod. So this is where it can get really, really expensive, because getting that third good mod, right, of either accuracy, dexterity, strength, intelligence, or even chaos resistance can be very, very hard, especially because, again, if you're using a hybrid pair of gloves, it's going to take on average 90 essences to hit T1 suppression, so this is not easy, right? But it's not, you know, the end of the world either. For example, when I was crafting my boots, which we're going to get into the boots for, a little bit later on, I was spamming for chaos resistance, and I hit my T1 suppress alongside a little bit of intelligence, you know, T4 intelligence, which is, you know, definitely not horrible. And this is kind of what you're going to be going for, that 1/3 modifier. The rest is basically going to stay the exact same, right? Once we hit this, the T1 suppression, we are going to make it Exarch dominant in order to be able to roll our prefixes, and then we are going to annul up to 2 prefixes. Now, one of the changes when it comes to the higher investment version, because we're not going to be multi-modding since we don't have a suffix available, what we're going to do is I'll just add a random suffix, right? Let's just say a little bit of attack speed. So something like this. What we're going to do in this case is, yes, we are going to go for Searing Exarch, but in this case, we are actually going to go for Exalted. The Eldritch Exalts, in order to get 2 prefixes, right? So we want to have 2 random prefixes. It doesn't matter what they are, but we need 2 of them. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use Eldritch Chaos Orbs, which are expensive. And we're just going to kind of spam them over and over again until we get a decent life roll. And hopefully something else that we want. But realistically, all we care about is the life roll. So this should not be too hard. Life has a pretty high weighting, but remember that every single one of those clicks is about 20C, so something like this wouldn't be horrible, right? We have the life, we have a little bit of fizz. Now the fizz doesn't help us, but the life is around the same as a crafted life, which is not horrible, but we could definitely go better if we really wanted to go for broke. We can go as good as we want. Personally, on my gloves, I ended up going with T3 life and T1 cold damage to attacks, but this was definitely a little bit lucky there. And then, of course, we are still going to finish off the craft with damage while leeching, because it is a very, very good mod for our build. It's a lot of damage, and we are always leeching because we need to leech mana, so we are always leeching. So this would kind of be a endgame pair of gloves. Gonna cost you a lot more than the early game, but still a lot less than the perfect gloves. Now, if you want to go for absolutely perfect, what you're gonna do is you're gonna go for sling gloves. Because sling gloves are basically going to make it much easier for you to hit the spell suppression. Because in this case, instead of going for the attack speed on the essence, and the reason why we go for attack speed on the endgame essence, or the endgame gloves actually, is because attack speed is significantly rarer than, say, intelligence or dexterity. So we actually want to force on the attack speed, and we want to get the attribute as a random modifier, as our third mod. But on the endgame gloves, we actually want to go with the essence for the attribute first. So what we'll do is we'll use Essences of Sorrow for Dexterity. You could also use any of the other one, be it Rage or Spite. In the end, it's just for T1 attributes. Now, Sorrow is Dexterity, which just kind of fits the pair of gloves, which are sling gloves. But we are going to spam Deafening Essences of Sorrow until we hit T1 Suppression, which is an average of 35 Essences. But the thing is, for this, we will need both an open prefix and an open suffix. Now, we know that we can open the prefix using the tech that I just explained, where we can use the Searing Exarch Dominance in order to annul just a prefix. But if you don't have an open suffix, you will need to just straight up annul it, because there's nothing else you can do. Now, once you've done that, if you're going for absolutely perfect gloves, you are basically going to craft on suffixes cannot be changed. Now, when you craft on suffixes cannot be changed, this is a prefix, which is why we need an open prefix, and we also need an open suffix because we are going to use Reforge Speed in Harvest. Now, this is not an augment, it's a reforge, which is very cheap, but we do have to lock in our suffixes, which is 2 exalt every single try. And of course, we only get 1 try. This, if we brick them and we don't get T1 and we're only going for T1, then we basically have to go back to spamming essences. So this can become very, very expensive, which is why these are perfect gloves. Okay, so what we're gonna do here is we're gonna reforge speed, and the thing is, the only tag with speed on gloves is attack speed. So we are guaranteed attack speed when we reforge, including a speed modifier, and this is a 1 in 4, right? There's only 4 tiers of attack speed on gloves, so it's not that rare or that hard to get, but of course it is still much, much more expensive than the previous options. Now, once we have the tier of attack speed that we actually care about, we're essentially just going to finish off the exact same way. So we're going to get 2 prefixes, and then we're going to spam Eldritch Chaos Orbs until we get some decent prefixes, such as Life and like Flat, Cold, or Fire, or Lightning, and then we're going to craft on the last stat, which is going to be damage while leeching, and essentially that's going to be our endgame gloves. Now, one thing that you could do for this specific pair of gloves is you could actually use the Eldritch Chaos for a single mod until you get life, like a good life roll. And then instead of re-rolling 2 at a time, what you could do is use a block and then exalt them instead. And when I say exalt, I mean Eldritch Exalt, not actual exalt, so it's a lot cheaper. So let's just say I was to spam this until I get T1 life. So I'm going to remove one of the prefixes, so I have only this. So let's go ahead and spam until eventually we hit T1 life. All right, let's see. All right, T1 life. Now what I can do if I want to go for absolutely perfect gloves and I'm willing to spend a ton of currency, I can benchcraft a prefix that will act as a block. So on these gloves, you could benchcraft, you know, pretty much anything. One of the best would probably be like evasion, but evasion wouldn't be a horrible slam, so you might not want to block that. So you could just block like hybrid life, I guess. It really is up to you. But you can put a block and then you can exalt slam it instead, and then hope for something good on the exalt slam. And the thing is, if you don't get something good, right? Let's just say you get something bad. Now T1 fire damage to attacks would be amazing, but let's just say you get like evasion and block recovery. You can just kind of try to annul it to save the life, and then exalt it again, and hope for something decent once again, and then finish it off with the damage while leeching craft. Again, all of this step by step is available in the document, which is linked in the description down below. Okay, moving on to boots. Now, boots are actually going to be basically the same, so there's not going to be too much to talk about. We are going to be going with sling boots yet again, because pure evasion bases are going to make it easier to spam essences into what we want. However, if you're going for super in-game boots, you're actually going to want to go with onslaught bases. Now, there's a bit of a problem with onslaught bases. is that in order to get spell suppression, you will need the boots to be evasion based, which means have at least some evasion on them. And the other issue is for T1 spell suppress, you need item level 85. And right now, there's not a single pair of boots like mine available on the trade site. But this is not the end of the world, because if you get a regular pair of boots without item level 85, so let's say you get a bit of a lower level, which can't roll T1, but it can roll T2 spell suppress, you can always get more suppressed damage with Orb of Conflicts on your gloves, and this, you know, can make it so you don't need T1. But yeah, Onslaught boots are endgame. Another option is to go with boots, which will have elusive as a prefix, but that is a lot more endgame and a lot more expensive, and also not necessary. It just gives us a tiny bit of move speed, doesn't really give us any damage, and it doesn't really give us any defenses, like, because we don't scale the elusive effect. So I personally don't really think it's that good. In my opinion, might as well just go for the Eldritch stuff instead, and it's also much easier to craft. Okay, so once we've decided whether we're going to be going for just regular sling boots or some super endgame onslaught boots, both of them are going to be crafted the same way. So the first thing is we're going to choose which essence we want. Personally, I recommend going with essences of chaos resistance, because this build doesn't get any real options for chaos resistance other than the rings, which we're going to talk about that in a minute. So I would personally go for chaos resistance essence, which is what I personally did on my boots in the first place. And again, we're just going to spam these essences away until we get T1 suppress spell damage. Now, whether we get it alongside something else that's decent, like intelligence, strength, whatever, is completely RNG, but all we really care about is having the T1 spell suppress. Now, once we've done that, so let's just say these are my boots, right? I spammed Chaos Essence until I got T1 suppress, and I also got a bit of intelligence, but it could also have been anything else. That just comes down to how much you're willing to spend. These are actually super easy to craft. We're just going to craft on suffixes, cannot be changed. This is going to require you to have an open prefix. If you don't have an open prefix, just feel free to use the Eldritch, the Eldritch technique, where you're basically going to use a lesser Eldritch Ember in order to make it Searing Dominant, and then you can safely use a Eldritch Annulment Orb and just remove one random prefix. Okay, so we craft on suffixes, cannot be changed. We're going to use a Veiled Chaos Orb, which is going to give us a Veiled modifier. We're going to craft on mana on the bench. This is in order to block it, and then we're going to unveil. Now, what we're looking for is obviously the move speed, but we can also get life if we get unlucky and we don't get any of the move speeds. But as you can see, it's a 50%, and there's 3 of them. So the vast majority of the time, you're going to unveil one of these movement speed rolls, especially with a mana block. I think it might actually be 100% of the time. So yeah, if not, we're just going to grab life. And then, of course, we're going to craft the missing stats. So if we unveiled life, we're going to craft on move speed. If we unveil move speed, we're going to craft on life. And at the end of the day, your boots will look something like mine. You might not have the intelligence. You probably won't have this flat mana. I just got this when I used the Veiled Chaos Orb. It wasn't like something I was going for. It just kind of happened. And why not, right? It's better than absolutely nothing. So yeah, these are my personal boots. So super, super easy. Just going to take you guys through this over on the website. So again, we're going to use essences of, I believe it's Envy for chaos resistance. And we're just going to spam away until we get T1 suppress. So again, I'm probably just going to cheat to make this a little bit easier. So let's just go ahead and remove that bench, and we're going to go ahead and put the suppress. So let's just say we had chaos resistance and our T1 suppress, and then nothing else that we care about. Right now, in this case, we got T1 move speed, which you could try to save that. But anyways, what we're going to do is we're going to craft on suffixes cannot be changed, which is a prefix, and then we're just going to Veiled Chaos Orb. If you wanted to save the T1 move speed, for example, instead of doing Veiled Chaos, you would actually use just a proper unveil, like unveil with Ashling level 4. But for us, we're just going to use a Veiled Chaos. This is going to give us a random prefix. We're just going to bench craft the mana in order to block it. Right, so we're going to block the mana, and then we're just going to unveil for move speed. Move speed, if you haven't been hit recently, is actually the best one that we can get. And then we're just going to finish it off by crafting on the bench for life. And essentially, that's going to be our pair of boots. It doesn't really have to be any more different than that. Of course, if you want a good third suffix, you're just going to have to keep spamming essences. And if you want a good third prefix, well, there's actually nothing you can really do, because there's not really any good third prefix. The only other option would be that if you wanted to go for, again, perfect boots, you could actually get cannot be frozen on your boots. And the way that you would do that is that instead of basically doing the Veiled Chaos strategy, you would re-roll for life, the same thing that we did with gloves, right? So you'd re-roll until you get good life, and then you would suffix lock, unveil for the move speed, and then you could craft on the bench for the last modifier, which would be cannot be frozen. But because we get cannot be frozen on Cyclopean Coil or even on our Brine King Pantheon, I feel like cannot be frozen is just not a modifier, which is all that great. Okay, and then finally we have the rings. So for the rings, there's going to be two different options. There's going to be option number 1, which is where you are using the Mark of the Elder. If you're using Mark of the Elder, you will basically want to just buy a ring that has Shape or Influence with the proper amount of affixes that you can afford. So I made a search. You can easily change the weighted sum total for, you know, whether you want a very good ring or a pretty mediocre ring, but it's going to be very simple. However, if you're going for endgame rings, and this is just for the suffixes, we're going to worry about prefixes in a second. If you're going for endgame rings, what we're going to do is we're going to basically buy a base which has fractured either strength, intelligence, or dexterity, right? Any 3 of them will be fine. Now, the base that you go for is going to matter a lot, especially in terms of price. So for example, if you're going for these amethyst rings for the chaos resistance, they're going to cost you like 10 exalt plus for the base. If you're going for opal rings, it's going to be even more expensive. But if you're going for something really cheap, like say just some random ring with resistances, it might only cost you a couple exalts. So it depends how good you want your rings to be, and of course how good you want your character to be and your budget available. But what we're going to do is we're going to spam the essence that we don't have fractured. So in this case, for example, we have fractured strength. So that we would spam either Essence of Spite or Essence of Sorrow for Dexterity or Intelligence, and then we would just spam the Essence until we get the other one as T1. So I believe this is something like an average of 90 Essences, so it can definitely be pretty pricey. But once we've got these three prefixes set up, it's kind of going to be the exact same thing as if you buy the suffixes already done. What you're going to do is the exact same thing. We're going to suffix lock with suffixes cannot be changed, and we're going to once again use a Veiled Chaos Orb. Now, by using a Veiled Chaos Orb, we are going to make it so we get a fractured, a random prefix. All right, so, or veiled prefix, sorry. So again, what I'll do here is I'll just go ahead and use essences of, let's say this is fractured dexterity, so I could use spite for intelligence, and I would just spam away until I also get strength. Right? Because I'm guaranteed the intelligence, I'm guaranteed the dexterity because it's fractured, so it's very easy. Okay, here we go. So I got T5 strength. Now let's just assume this was T1, so I'm like, okay, this is good enough. I'm going to go ahead and benchcraft the prefix suffixes cannot be changed, so the exact same things we've been doing all day. Slap one of these on. Now this is going to give us a veiled prefix. Again, we're going to block the flat mana, so we're going to go ahead onto the bench, and we're going to block a mana as a prefix. So let's go ahead and do that, and then we're going to unveil, and what we're looking for is life. So regen, mana per second, and life. Now this is perfect. And then we would finish off the craft by crafting the minus mana cost, right? So that's exactly what your ring should look like if you're going for a fairly budget ring. Now let's just say that you actually want to spend more currency and you want to go for something that's a little bit more endgame. The only difference is that at this point, right, when your ring looks like this, and you have suffixes cannot be changed with your triple attribute suffixes, instead of doing a Veiled Chaos, we're going to go with Harvest Reforges. And we're going to do a Reforge Life. Now, this is going to give us a random life prefix, and I believe it's a 1 in 11 or a 1 in 9 for T1 life. So in this case, for example, we got 3 prefixes. This is bad. We would have to do a Reforge keeping suffixes. And then again, we would go ahead and bench, craft on, suffixes cannot be changed. And then once more, go to Reforge Life, and then hopefully we get a decent life roll. This is going to cost us 2 exalt every single try. Now this is about the equivalent of a bench craft, T3, so let's just say this is good enough. Again, we're going to craft on suffixes cannot be changed, and we are going to Ashling. So this is a 50-50, right? It's not guaranteed, because when you Ashling, you can hit either the life or the suffixes cannot be changed. So it can become very, very expensive for just a little bit more damage. Which is why I'm saying this is super endgame stuff. But now once we have our veiled prefix, and let's just say our life actually stayed, which means we won the 50-50, we are once again going to benchcraft mana to block it, and then we're going to unveil, and we're guaranteed to get the hybrid flat elemental damage. And just like on the Quiver, this is barely any worse than tier 1 elemental damage with attack skills. But it's significantly easier to get. So this is very solid. So we could just do like cold and lightning. And then once again, we would finish off with a bench craft of minus mana cost, right? Non-channeling skills have minus mana cost. So I would go ahead and just put this on, and that would basically my end game ring. And if you actually look at my rings, that's exactly what they look like. And that's the exact method that I use to craft them. So looking at my rings, for example, this one has T2 life with the unveil, the mana cost, and then of course the triple attributes. And this one also has the life, the unveil, the mana cost, and then the triple attributes. This one, however, has T3 life. Unfortunately, the only time that I got T1 life, I missed on the unveil. But just these prefixes, right? Just the cost to get these, the little bit of flat damage to these rings cost me something like 40 exalt for both rings. And this is without any of the other steps of the crafting, which is why I'm saying, again, this can become very, very expensive, but this is exactly how you go about crafting every single one of my pieces of gear for this build. So hopefully this video has been helpful and have taught you guys a little bit in terms of how to craft. I really think that the gloves and the boots are where you are going to benefit the most from this crafting guide, because the rings are easy to buy, and so are the quivers, and so are the bows. But the gloves and boots, there's just no market right now for good spell suppression gear, and it's honestly not that hard to craft. I think that there's definitely some profit to be made crafting those for other people as well, because a lot of people are not going to watch this video and therefore not going to know how to get their end game spell suppression gear for this build. Again, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. I know it's been a really long one. Before I go, as always, I want to say a massive thank you to my supporters. So Jacob, Alex, Max, Hamad, Rescoral, Brandon, welcome back, Thomas Snake, The Great Master, Alex, The Third Alex, Tim, Mercury, Johnny, Gary, Fish, Nailed, The Arsonist, and Bizen, as well as, of course, anybody else who has supported me in the past, and anyone else who wishes to remain anonymous. That'll be Matthew signing out. Until next one. Peace.